Welcome to today's explainer. Picture this for a second. You're living under the immense, crushing weight of early 20th century British colonial rule in India. The stakes are unimaginably high, and calls for violent, armed rebellion are absolutely everywhere. But what if the most dangerous weapon against an empire isn't a sword at all? What if it's actually an unshackled mind? Well, that is the revolutionary idea Rabindranath Tagore presents in his absolute masterpiece, Where the Mind is Without Fear. So let's dive right into this. Here's our roadmap for today. We're going to cover the context of the poem, do a quick line-by-line breakdown looking at fearless minds, breaking down domestic walls, and the stream of reason, before we wrap up with a look at a heaven of freedom and the poem's lasting legacy. Okay, Section 1, Context of the Poem. So, Rabindranath Tagore is arguably the greatest writer in modern Indian literature. Born in 1861, he became this massive global literary giant, winning the Nobel Prize in 1913. The British Crown even knighted him in 1915. But notice what happens right here, in 1919. He dramatically surrenders that knighthood to protest the Amritsar massacre, which is when British troops killed hundreds of unarmed Indian demonstrators. You know, he was known in the West mostly as a mystic, but he was actually a fierce reformer. And there is just a brilliant irony here. A man knighted by the British Empire, politely but firmly destroying their colonial justifications through a deeply rational, beautifully translated English poem. Now, while a lot of nationalist texts from his era relied on highly emotive, militant battle cries to inspire rebellion, Tagore pivots. This poem is really a rational, introspective supplication. It's literally a prayer for cultural transformation, focusing heavily on internal, psychological reform, way more than physical resistance. Moving on to Section 2, Knowledge and Fearless Minds. This poem is actually structured as a single sonnet-like unit in free verse, which gives it this really beautiful, meditative, incantatory rhythm. Just listen to these opening lines. Where the mind is without fear and the head is held high, where knowledge is free. Notice the lack of complex metaphor there? It's completely plain and startlingly direct. Despite the elevated theme, the diction stays super plain and declarative. Tagore is establishing a massive core value right out of the gate: epistemic freedom. Put simply, he's arguing that before you can overthrow a government, you absolutely have to overthrow the limits on your own mind. An unshackled intellect and accessible knowledge are the absolute prerequisites for a nation to truly wake up. All right, Section 3, Breaking Down Domestic Walls. Here, Tagore zooms out from the individual mindset to broader society, where the world has not been broken up into fragments by narrow domestic walls, where words come out from the depth of truth, where tireless striving stretches its arms towards perfection. That imagery of a world completely shattered by narrow domestic walls is just so haunting. What's amazing is how Tagore brilliantly anticipates post-colonial discourse right here. He's directly critiquing how societies divide themselves based on sectarianism, regionalism, and inherited traditions. In the archive comments for this poem, readers highlight this exact issue, pointing out how communities from the exact same nation often sabotage each other just because of these narrow domestic walls. Tagore realized that a nation fractured from within is never truly free, no matter who sits in the capital. Which brings us to Section 4, the stream of reason. This leads to what is arguably the most evocative and celebrated metaphor in the entire piece, where the clear stream of reason has not lost its way into the dreary desert sand of dead habit. We've got to pause here for a second because source comments frequently point to these specific lines as the absolute heartbeat of the poem. Just look at that stark environmental contrast he paints. You have the lively, flowing, clear stream of reason pitted right against the stagnant, dreary desert sand of dead habit. This is a fierce and, honestly, often under-discussed critique of religious orthodoxy. He's subtly privileging fluid rationality and truth-speaking over stagnant, inherited rituals, basically warning us that blindly following dead habits will literally dry up a nation's potential. Next up is Section 5, A Heaven of Freedom. So, having laid out the ground rules for true independence, knowledge, unity, and reason, Tagore delivers this incredibly powerful concluding prayer. Where the mind is led forward by thee, into ever-widening thought and action, into that heaven of freedom, my Father, let my country awake. Notice that sudden shift? He's now directly addressing a divine father or deity. He's masterfully blending spiritual supplication with enlightenment values here. Tagore positions moral clarity and rational, ever-widening thought
not as secular alternatives to religion, but actually as divine gifts. For him, spirituality and reason are definitely not opposing forces. True spiritual awakening actually requires a rational, united, and completely free mind.
And finally, Section 6, the poem's lasting legacy. So, what does this all mean for us today? How do modern readers interpret a century-old prayer? Looking at the source comments, the resonance is just incredible across vastly different political spectrums. People connect the poem to the threat of modern totalitarianism, noting that authoritarian systems still fear an unshackled mind more than anything else. Readers use it to discuss overcoming regional divides, the often painful gap between constitutional ideals and gritty modern political realities, and the ongoing battle between reason and emotion in post-colonial states. Tagore's warnings are literally just as urgent today. Which leaves us with a huge question to ponder as we wrap up this explainer. Are the narrow domestic walls in our modern world finally crumbling, or are we really just building new ones? I highly encourage you to reflect on your own society through Tagore's incredibly sharp lens. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey today. Keep your mind fearless and keep your head held high.